There are men whom the entire underworld bows to. Dante Moretti is one of them. But tonight, at his private airport in the dead of night, Europe's most powerful Don doesn't see his future wife. He sees her, the woman he betrayed, 7 months pregnant, covered in bruises, desperately trying to escape. And in a fleeting moment, Dante Moretti, a man who never puts anything above power, risks everything. Like and comment the city you're viewing from so I know how far this story has progressed. Don't go anywhere. The Gulfstream touched down at 11:47 p.m. No announcement. No runway lights beyond the minimum required. Sable Pines Private Airfield existed on no commercial map and appeared on no flight registry that any government agency had clearance to access. It sat 40 minutes outside the city in a flat stretch of land that belonged, on paper, to a shell company registered in Luxembourg, which was owned by another company in Malta, which traced back to a holding firm that dissolved itself every 3 years and reconstituted under a different name. The men who knew what the airfield actually was didn't need maps. They knew because Dante Moretti owned it, and Dante Moretti's name didn't appear on anything. He stood on the tarmac with his jacket open despite the October cold. 2 bodyguards flanked him at a respectful distance, close enough to react, far enough to pretend he had privacy. Behind him, 6 black SUVs idled in a loose formation, engines running, headlights off. 43 meters to his left, a second aircraft was already docked and being refueled. The Viorelli family's plane, which had arrived 90 minutes ahead of schedule without explanation. Dante noted the early arrival the way he noted everything, quietly, with the specific kind of stillness that meant he was thinking about what it cost. He was 41 years old. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and now was something harder, jaw defined by tension rather than genetics, dark eyes that didn't offer warmth as a default setting, a mouth that had long since stopped performing pleasantries it didn't mean. He was not a large man by the standards of the world he ran, but he carried himself with a density that made other men unconsciously step back when he entered a room. Not from fear exactly, from something more instinctive than fear, something that said, "This one has already decided." Tonight, he was here to welcome Camilla Varelli, 26 years old, daughter of Enzo Varelli, head of the Varelli syndicate out of Milan. The alliance between the Moretti family and the Varelli network had been 3 years in negotiation and would, once formalized through the marriage, give Dante operational control over the northern Italian ports and a cut of the Varelli pharmaceutical pipeline running through 4 countries. It was not a small thing. It was, by any calculation that mattered to the men who ran the world beneath the world, the deal of the decade. It would make him untouchable. It would end the kind of threats that kept lesser men awake at night. Dante didn't need the deal to sleep. He hadn't needed anything in a long time. His underboss, Vincent Caruso, appeared at his left shoulder. Vincent was 53, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard he kept trimmed and eyes that had learned over decades to express loyalty on command. He had been with the Moretti family for 22 years. He had watched Dante's father run the organization and had made the transition without hesitation when Dante took over at 29. He was the kind of man other men described as a cornerstone. "Varelli's people confirmed Camilla is on board," Vincent said. "We've got our security detail, 3 attendants, and Enzo's personal lawyer to witness the signing." Enzo himself? Didn't make the flight. Says his health. Dante said nothing. He filed that away. "Everything on schedule," Vincent continued. "I've got Russo and the others in the East Terminal with the contracts. We signed tonight. We moved the formal announcement to the family gathering next week. And it's done." He paused. Straightforward. Dante didn't answer immediately. He was looking past Vincent toward the far end of the terminal building, the public-facing side, which wasn't public in any real sense, but maintained the infrastructure of an international transit hub. There were lights on in the main corridor, a cleaning crew, 2 of his perimeter men stationed at the glass doors, and someone moving wrong. Not wrong in the way his security team moved. Trained, economical, eyes scanning. Wrong in a different way. Uneven. Slow on one side. The body language of someone trying to be invisible and failing because the body itself wouldn't cooperate. A woman. Dark coat. Hair pulled back, moving through the far corridor with a rolling carry-on bag and a messenger bag slung across one shoulder, And even at this distance and through reinforced glass, something about the way she carried the weight of herself made Dante's chest compress in a way that had no tactical explanation. He looked for 3 seconds before he knew. He would have known in 1 second if he'd allowed himself to. "Dante!" Vincent's voice had taken on the careful tone of a man who understood he was about to lose his audience. "The Varelli plane is deplaning. Camilla will be on the tarmac in 4 minutes. Get Russo to handle the greeting." "Excuse me?" "You heard me?" He was already moving. Vincent grabbed his arm, stopped himself, let go, because there were things you didn't do to Dante Moretti regardless of how long you'd known him. "The deal," he said instead. "Tonight is— I know what tonight is." He crossed the tarmac with long strides, 2 of his men falling in behind him automatically, and pushed through the side door into the terminal building without slowing. The corridor was linoleum and harsh fluorescent lighting, the kind of space that served a function and made no apology for it. A maintenance cart sat abandoned near the far wall. One of his perimeter guards, a young man named Piero, who had been with him 14 months, was standing at the corridor intersection with an expression that said he'd already clocked the woman and wasn't sure what the protocol was. Dante walked past him without acknowledgement. She had made it nearly to the international transit doors. Another 30 seconds and she would have been through them, into the public buffer zone, and then into the city and gone. He registered all of this the way he registered everything, as information, as geometry, as the arithmetic of what could still be controlled and what couldn't. "Elena." She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. He watched her shoulders pull in, watched her spine do something complicated, a kind of bracing, like a person preparing to absorb an impact they already knew was coming. Then she turned. She looked at him with dark eyes that had aged in ways that had nothing to do with years. There was a bruise along her left jaw, faded to the yellow-green of old damage, a week old, maybe 10 days, a cut above her right eyebrow, healed but still visible. Her face was thinner than he remembered it, the angles sharper, but the sharpness wasn't the good kind. It was the kind that came from not eating enough, from too much stress metabolizing muscle into fuel. And she was— the word his mind supplied was enormous, and he hated himself for the inadequacy of it. 7 months. He'd been told 7 months by sources he wouldn't examine too closely in this moment. He looked at her and the number became real in a way that data had protected him from. "You have got to be kidding me," Elena Varelli said. Her voice was lower than he remembered, rougher, like something had been worn down in it. "Don't move." "I'm not doing this." She turned back toward the door. "Elena." He put enough into his voice to stop her without touching her, and she stopped. And he knew she hated that she'd stopped, knew it because of the way her free hand closed into a fist at her side. He moved until he was close enough to speak quietly. His men had bracketed the corridor and entrance. No one would enter or exit without his knowledge. "Look at me." She looked at him. "I'm looking. Are you satisfied?" He wasn't. He was the opposite of satisfied. He was standing inside a moment he'd spent 8 months refusing to imagine, and reality was much worse than the version he'd refused. "How long have you been in that building?" "That's your first question. Answer it." "I've been in a lot of buildings, Dante. You'd need to be more specific about which ones." "The one you came off of in the last hour." Something crossed her face. A flicker of calculation. The same thing that had made her the best financial strategist he'd ever hired. She was deciding what he already knew, measuring the gap between what she could deny and what she couldn't. He watched her do the math and watched her reach the conclusion that the gap was too small to be useful. "Marco Salvatore's transport," she said. Flat. No performance in it. The name landed in his chest like a coal. He kept his face neutral. "You were with Salvatore." "I wasn't with him by choice." "How long?" 5 months. He did not allow himself to react visibly. He thought about the arithmetic instead. She had left his organization 8 months ago, had been removed, more accurately, which was the version he'd constructed for himself and which he was now being forced to dismantle in real time. 3 months on her own. Then 5 months with Marco Salvatore. Salvatore, who was the closest thing the Eastern Coalition had to a rival that Dante still took seriously. Salvatore, who had a reputation for creative cruelty that even men in this world discussed in lowered voices. He hurt you, Dante said. Brilliant deduction. Elena, no. Her voice didn't rise. It got tighter, which was worse. You don't get to say my name like that. You don't get to stand here and look at me like I'm something that happened to you. I'm the one who... She stopped herself, pressed her lips together. He watched her find the control she needed. I need to get through those doors. You're not going through those doors. You don't own this terminal. Actually, he said, I do. She stared at him. Her breathing was slightly uneven. He could see it in the rise and fall of her chest, in the slight tension around her nostrils. She was tired, bone-tired, the kind that sleep couldn't fix because it had been accumulating too long. And she was scared, though she was performing not scared with considerable skill. He had trained her, in a sense. Or she had trained herself around him, which amounted to the same thing. What are you doing here? She asked. Business. Her eyes moved behind him, toward the tarmac, toward where he knew the Virelli plane was deplaning. Understanding crossed her face, and with it something that might have been contempt, or might have been pain, or might have been both so thoroughly blended that they'd become a single expression. The marriage, she said. He said nothing. Virelli's daughter. She laughed, a short sound with nothing light in it. Of course, the great alliance. The thing that was always more important than... She stopped again, put her hand on the side of her stomach in a gesture that wasn't theatrical. It was just a hand finding ballast. Congratulations, she said. I hope she's everything you calculated. He looked at her hand on her stomach. Is it mine? He said. Not a question. Go to hell. Elena. Yes. The word came out stripped of everything except exhaustion. Yes, it's yours. Are we done? Because I have somewhere to be that isn't here, and I have... Her voice frayed slightly at the edge, and she pulled it back together. I need to move. You're not going anywhere, he said. Not like this. You don't get a vote. I'm taking one anyway. She looked at him with those exhausted, careful eyes, and he saw the exact moment she calculated that she couldn't physically get through the doors if he didn't want her to. Not in her current condition, not against his men, not in a building he owned. He watched her absorb that reality. He watched the way it sat on her. I hate you, she said quietly. I know. I'm not saying it for effect, Dante. I'm not being dramatic. I genuinely, specifically hate you. What you did, what it cost me, She swallowed. You should know that. Before anything else happens, you should know that's where we're starting from. Understood, he said. He turned to Piero, who had maintained a studied non-presence throughout. Get Dr. Favre here within the hour. I want the third-floor suite prepared, and I want 2 female staff members assigned to Miss Virelli by the time she gets upstairs. He paused. Not Virelli. Romano. He looked back at her. You're still using Romano? She blinked. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, more like surprise she hadn't accounted for. Yes. Ms. Romano, he said to Piero. Move. Piero moved. Dante turned back to Elena and found her staring at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize, which was unusual. He was generally good at categorizing her expressions. He had spent 2 years learning them before he'd spent 8 months trying to forget them. You're going to miss your fiancé's arrival, she said. Russo will manage the greeting. Dante, this is the Virelli alliance. This is the thing you... She stopped, searched his face. What are you doing? He didn't have a clean answer. He was aware of that. He was also aware that behind him, on the tarmac, a 26-year-old woman was descending the stairs of a private jet, expecting to meet the man she was about to marry, and that every political calculation he had spent 3 years constructing was in the process of being abandoned in a fluorescent-lit corridor because he could not make his feet move in any direction except the one he was currently standing in. He was not a man who operated on feeling. He understood this about himself. He had built an empire on the specific absence of feeling. on the capacity to run the arithmetic on any situation and execute the answer regardless of what it cost personally. That was the job. That was what the job required. He had made the job his whole life because it was cleaner than the alternative, and he had believed that right up until 30 seconds ago. "Come with me," he said. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Elena, you came off a salvatory transport, which means either you escaped or he let you go. And if he let you go, I know what it means if he let me go. Then you understand why you can't be in a public corridor." She held his gaze. Her jaw was tight. She was doing the same calculation he was doing, arriving at the same conclusion from the other direction. "You'll put me in a room," she said. "And then what? I become a different kind of captive because I'm done being—" "Not captive," he said. "Safe. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." "Then move closer and look again." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her own hand, still resting against the side of her stomach, and he watched her make a decision that he understood had nothing to do with him and everything to do with what she was protecting. "One conversation," she said. "I talk, you listen. After that, if I want to leave, you let me leave." "Agreed." "I mean it, Dante." "I know you do." She held his eyes for another moment, then reached down for the handle of her carry-on. He reached for it at the same time. Their hands didn't touch. She pulled back a half-second before contact, and he took the bag and neither of them said anything about it. They walked down the corridor, his men falling into position around them, and Dante did not look back toward the tarmac where the Virelli Alliance was deplaning without him. He was already doing the math on what he'd just done, the cost of it, the weight of it, the cascade of consequences that would follow from this single, inarguable pivot. He was aware that it would be expensive. He was aware that walking away from the Virelli marriage without warning, without diplomatic cushioning, without the 3 years of careful preparation that had gone into building it, that it would read as an insult, that Enzo Virelli would have no framework for it that didn't end in grievance, that the rival families who had been watching this alliance take shape would now be watching it fracture, and that fractures were invitations. He was aware of all of it. He walked forward anyway. The elevator at the end of the corridor opened when Piero hit the call button. Dante stepped in first, checked the corners out of habit. Elena stepped in beside him. She stood about 18 inches away with her messenger bag pulled against her body and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, and the elevator doors closed, and he could hear her breathing and could hear his own breathing and could feel the presence of her, not proximity in the ordinary sense, but something denser, something that had been waiting in the margins of the last 8 months like an unpaid debt. "Vincent is going to try to stop this," she said, as the elevator began to move. "Vincent doesn't stop things I decide." She nodded slowly, like she was filing something away rather than agreeing. "That's what he wants you to think," she said. He looked at her. She didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the elevator doors. The elevator stopped at the 3rd floor. The doors opened. She walked out first, slightly ahead of him, and he noticed that she was listing slightly to the right, compensating for the weight, compensating for what he suspected was an injury she hadn't mentioned. He noticed that she hadn't put down the messenger bag, despite the obvious discomfort of carrying it. He noticed that her grip on it was the kind of grip you used when something was more important than comfort. The suite was lit, staff already moving. A woman he didn't recognize, one of Piero's people then, brought in clean, was turning down the bed in the next room. A medical kit sat on the side table. Elena stood in the center of the suite and looked around it with the expression of someone who had learned to evaluate rooms for exits before evaluating them for comfort. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." "You're leaning." "I've been leaning for 2 months. I'm used to it." But she moved toward the low couch near the window and lowered herself onto it with the carefully controlled movement of someone whose body had become a negotiation. She set the messenger bag on the cushion beside her with both hands, deliberately, and he read the deliberateness. "What's in the bag?" he said. She looked at him. "Elena?" "Sit down," she said, "and I'll tell you everything." He pulled the chair from the desk and sat across from her and waited. Outside, he knew Vincent was handling the Virelli arrival and trying to reach him by phone. His phone had been on silent since he'd crossed the tarmac. He knew the window for managing this situation diplomatically was closing fast. He knew that every minute he sat in this chair was another minute that the alliance he'd spent 3 years building was being renegotiated without him, by people who didn't yet understand that he'd made a choice. Elena Virelli, Elena Romano, looked at him across the low table with bruised eyes and a thinner face and said, "Vincent Caruso has been selling your family's information for at least 7 months." The room was very quiet. "I have the proof," she said. She put her hand on the messenger bag. "All of it. Transaction records, contact names, dates, and amounts." She paused. "He's been working with Marco, not just intelligence, operational details, safe house locations, shipment schedules, personnel." She paused again, and something moved in her face that he couldn't name. "He knows about the gathering next week, the commission meeting. He's planning to use it." Dante sat very still. "Marco told you this," he said. "Marco showed me the records. He thought it was leverage. Over me, over you. He thought I was going to help him use it." She looked at him steadily. "He was wrong about what I was going to do with it." Dante looked at the messenger bag. He looked at the woman sitting across from him with her hand resting on it like she'd been carrying this particular weight for months, which she had. He thought about Vincent Caruso, 53 years old, 22 years with the family, cornerstone, standing on the tarmac 45 minutes ago with his careful, loyal eyes and his careful, loyal voice. And he thought about the word cornerstone and what it meant when the corner turned out to be hollow. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the screen without picking it up. Vincent calling. He set the phone face down on the table. "Start from the beginning," he said to Elena. "All of it, from when you left." She took a slow breath. She pressed her lips together once, the way she always had when she was organizing something complicated into a sequence she could actually say out loud. Then she opened the messenger bag and began to lay documents on the table between them, and Dante Moretti, who had not felt anything resemble fear in longer than he could calculate, felt something cold move through him that had no name yet, but was building toward one. Outside, on the third-floor window, the October wind pushed against the glass. Below them, on the tarmac, a 26-year-old woman in an ivory coat was being greeted by a man who was not the Don she'd come to marry. And somewhere in the city, in a heavily guarded estate that Dante now understood he'd been maneuvered to underestimate, Marco Salvatore was waiting to learn whether his leverage had arrived safely or had found its way to exactly the wrong hands. The first document Elena placed on the table was a wire transfer record. Dante looked at the account number. He looked at the date. He looked at the amount. He recognized 2 of the 3. The third, the destination account, he'd never seen before. But he would find it. He would trace every number on every page Elena was laying out in front of him, and he would build the complete picture. And when the picture was complete, he would know exactly what the man he'd trusted for 22 years had decided his empire was worth. Elena watched him read. "There's more," she said. The commission gathering. Vincent gave Marco the full guest list. Arrival windows, security arrangements. She paused. "It's not just intelligence, Dante. It's a blueprint." He looked up from the document. "They're going to move during the gathering," she said. "When every major family is in one place and your men are split between 40 different protections." She held his gaze. "Unless you already know about it. Unless this is—" She stopped. "Unless I just walked into something I don't fully understand." "You didn't," he said. "How do I know that?" "Because if I wanted you dead, Elena, you'd already be dead, and you know that." She held his eyes for a long moment. "That's not exactly reassuring." "It's not meant to be reassuring. It's meant to be accurate." She looked down at the documents on the table. He watched her process something, some internal recalibration, some adjustment to whatever plan she'd been running since she'd walked off that transport. She hadn't come here expecting to find him. He understood that. She'd been navigating toward something, an exit, a contact, somewhere to take what she was carrying, and he'd intercepted her path before she could get there. And now she was doing what she always did when the landscape changed. She was recalculating. "If Vincent finds out I'm here," she said quietly. "He won't. Not yet. That's a narrow window. I've worked in narrower." He reached for the next document on the table, and his phone buzzed again on the table surface. Face down, screen dark. And he left it there. And Elena watched him leave it there. And something in her face shifted in a way he'd have to think about later, when there was time to think about things that weren't immediately critical. There wasn't time now. He read. Outside the window, the October sky was full of cloud, no stars, the kind of dark that had no softness in it. And in the east wing of the building, Dante knew Vincent Caruso was standing with the Virelli lawyer and a set of unsigned contracts, wondering where his Don had gone, and calculating, as he had apparently been calculating for months, what the best move was. The problem for Vincent was that Dante was calculating too, and he had always been faster. The documents were spread across the low table like evidence at a trial, which was exactly what they were. Dante read without speaking. He had a way of reading that most people found unsettling. No visible reaction, no shift in posture, no tells in the face. He moved through each page with the same measured attention, and only someone who knew him well enough to track the small things would have noticed. The slight tightening at the corner of his jaw when he hit the third wire transfer. The pause, half a second longer than the others, when he reached the page with the operational details of the commission gathering. The way his right hand, resting on the arm of the chair, went very still on that page, like a man who had stopped all non-essential movement to direct everything available toward processing. Elena watched all of it. She had spent 2 years learning to read him at the level below expression because that was the only level that mattered with Dante Moretti. And what she read now was a man absorbing something that was costing him more than he would allow his face to show. Good, she thought, and hated herself slightly for thinking it. She was exhausted in a way that had moved past tired and into something structural. Exhaustion as a permanent condition of her body, running underneath everything else like a current she couldn't switch off. Her lower back had been a specific kind of pain for 6 weeks. Her right ankle, which she hadn't mentioned and wasn't going to, had been wrapped under her boot since 3 days ago when she'd misjudged a staircase in the dark. She needed water. She needed to lie down. She needed about 14 things that had nothing to do with the man sitting 4 feet away from her reading a document that outlined his underboss's plan to have him killed. She needed to get out of this building. She had not entirely given up on that goal. She'd simply suspended it pending new information. Dante set down the last page. He straightened the stack against the table with 2 precise taps, a habit she remembered, the kind of small organizational gesture that meant his brain was in a certain gear. Then he looked at her. The account receiving the transfers, he said. You traced it. As far as I could from what Marco had. It terminates in a private bank in Liechtenstein. The beneficial owner is masked behind 2 more layers of corporate structure. She paused. But the pattern of transfers matches the timing of 3 operational failures your family had in the last 8 months. Shipments that got hit. A safe house that got raided. She let that land. You attributed those to the Ferrano family. We had reason to. You had manufactured reason. Marco gave you the reason. Dante was quiet for a moment. Through Vincent. Vincent flagged the Ferrano connection to you, yes. He stood up. He didn't pace. He wasn't a pacer. But he moved to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the dark tarmac below, and she could see the tension in the line of his shoulders working through something that his face wasn't going to process publicly. 22 years, he said. I know. I was at his daughter's wedding. I know, Dante. He was at my father's funeral. He said it without inflection, just the fact of it, placed in the room. Elena said nothing. There was nothing useful to say to that, and she wasn't going to perform sympathy she didn't have the bandwidth for, not tonight, not after everything. He turned from the window. The thing she'd read in his shoulders was gone now, packed back down, compressed into the operational layer. How much does Marco know about what you took? He knows I had access. He doesn't know the extent of what I copied. She paused. He thinks he let me go as a message. Show up with nothing, or show up and give you what I have in exchange for protection. She looked at him steadily. He expected me to negotiate. He didn't expect me to just give it to you. Why did you? The question sat between them. Because if Vincent moves during the commission gathering and it works, she said, there's no version of what happens next where my daughter is safe. Marco's leverage dies with you. He has no use for her then. He has no use for me. She held his gaze. I'm not doing this for you. I want that to be completely clear. It's clear. I'm doing it because it's the only move that gets her a future that isn't... She stopped. Her hand went to her stomach again. She pulled it back, annoyed at herself for the tell. I need something from you in return. Name it. After this is done, however this ends, I leave. Clean. No obligations, no family debt, no claim on her from the Moretti name. She's mine. That's the trade. Something moved in his face. Not quite pain. Something adjacent to it that he shut down before it fully formed. That's not a decision I can make in this room. Then it's a decision you make before I let you use what's in that bag. Elena. No. Her voice was quiet, but it was not soft. I did not survive 5 months of Marco Salvatore's hospitality to trade one cage for another. You want what I have, you agree to my terms. All of them. Tonight. He looked at her for a long moment. She could feel him calculating. Not whether she meant it, because she could see he knew she meant it, but whether the calculation on his end added up to yes or to a counteroffer. Dante Moretti didn't give things away without knowing the full price. He never had. It was what made him the man he was, and it was the thing she'd spent 2 years learning to navigate, and it was the thing that had ultimately made her completely dispensable when the Varelli marriage became the smarter play. She waited. Agreed, he said. She searched his face. I mean it, he said, which was what she had said to him downstairs, and she registered the echo of it and didn't know what to do with it, so she filed it in the same folder where she'd been storing everything. She didn't have the capacity to process right now. The folder was getting full. A knock at the suite door. Dante crossed to it without hurry and opened it 6 inches. Piero's voice, low. Dr. Favre is here. And sir, Mr. Caruso is asking for you. He's in the East Corridor. He says it's urgent. Tell him I'm in a call with the Varelli lawyer. 20 minutes. He said to tell you Camilla Varelli is asking for an explanation and her father is on the phone from Milan. Then Vincent can explain to him that I'll be available shortly. He paused. And send Favre in. He closed the door and turned back to find Elena watching him. You're stalling, she said. I'm managing. You're stalling, and Vincent's going to know something is wrong within the next 10 minutes. Vincent has been wrong about things for 7 months. He can be wrong for 10 more minutes. He said it evenly, but she heard the edge underneath it. Not anger, exactly. The particular flatness that came from a man keeping anger at operational distance because anger wasn't useful yet. The doctor is going to look at you. I don't need... You have a bruise on your jaw that's 10 days old and you're favoring your right side and you haven't put that bag down since we got in the elevator. He looked at her. You need a doctor. After that, we talk about what happens next. She wanted to argue. She was too tired to argue. She turned toward the bedroom doorway, and he didn't help her up. She wouldn't have accepted it. But he watched her get up from the couch with an attention that felt different from surveillance, and she didn't have the energy to figure out what it was different from. Dr. Favre was a small woman in her 60s with silver hair and the unhurried manner of someone who had operated in this world long enough that nothing surprised her anymore. She shook Elena's hand rather than waiting for an introduction, set her bag on the dresser, and looked at Elena the way doctors looked at people when they were taking in more than the obvious. When did you last see a doctor? She asked. 6 weeks ago. One of Marco's people. He was checking on, Elena gestured. On the pregnancy, not on you. Correct. Favre made a sound that expressed a professional opinion without requiring words. Sit on the edge of the bed, please. Elena sat. Through the open doorway, she could hear Dante on the phone. She couldn't make out the words, just the cadence, which was low and controlled and giving very little. She focused on the doctor's hands, which were efficient and gentle in a way that Elena hadn't encountered in months, and felt something try to crack open in her chest that she immediately sealed back. Not now. There was no now for that. Your blood pressure is elevated, Favre said. Not dangerously, but significantly. You're dehydrated. She paused over the ankle, looking at it with careful fingers. How long? 3 days. You've been walking on this for 3 days. I didn't have another option. Favre looked at her with eyes that held something between professional disapproval and genuine concern. The baby's position is normal. Heartbeat is strong. She paused. But you are not in good condition, Ms. Romano. You understand what I mean by that? I understand. Good. I want you horizontal within the hour, and I want you to drink. She was already pulling a bottle of electrolyte solution from her bag. All of this. Not over the night. Now. Elena took the bottle. Through the doorway, Dante's voice had stopped. She heard him come back into the main room, heard him stop at the doorway, heard the silence of him standing there for a moment before he moved away. She drank. Favre wrapped the ankle with practiced hands and administered 2 injections, one for blood pressure, one for something else she explained in terms Elena absorbed and cataloged, and then sat back and looked at her patient with the expression of someone about to say something that wasn't in the medical brief. He's been standing outside that door for most of the last 10 minutes, Favre said. Elena kept her eyes on the window. I'm not telling you what that means, Favre said. I'm just telling you what I observed. Thank you, doctor. Favre stood, began repacking her bag. Sleep if you can. Not on the couch. The bed. She paused at the door. The baby is strong. Whatever you did to keep her that way, it worked. She left. Elena sat on the edge of the bed for a moment in the quiet. Then she picked up the electrolyte bottle and walked back into the main room. Dante was on the phone again, standing near the window with his back to the room. He heard her come in. She could tell by the infinitesimal change in his posture, but he didn't turn. She settled back onto the couch and pulled the messenger bag against her and listened to the half of the conversation she could hear. Tell Enzo I'll speak with him personally, tonight. A pause. No, not through the lawyer. Another pause, longer. I understand what this looks like. I'm telling you it will be addressed. He ended the call, stood for a moment with the phone in his hand, then turned. He looked at her, then at the ankle, which was now visibly wrapped below her pulled-up trouser leg. 3 days, she said before he could ask. Elena, I know, I'm aware. She cut it off before it could become something she'd have to manage. What's happening downstairs? He moved back to the chair, sat. His jacket was off now. She hadn't noticed when that had happened. And he had the slightly frayed quality of a man who was running multiple problems in parallel and keeping none of them from the others. Enzo Varelli is angry, which is predictable. Camilla is in the West Suite with her people, which is where she should be until I can have a direct conversation. He paused. Vincent is in the East Corridor and has stopped trying to reach me by phone. Which means he's moved to a different kind of problem-solving. She understood. Vincent Caruso was not stupid. 22 years as underboss to 2 generations of Moretti men had made him expert in exactly one thing, reading a situation and adapting before it turned on him. If he'd stopped calling, he'd stopped believing the problem was a conversation. He'll try to find out what's in this suite, she said. He'll have someone try. He won't do it himself. Who would he use? Dante looked at her in a way that told her he was already 3 steps ahead of this and had been since before she'd come back into the main room. Russo, he said. Possibly. Russo has been with the family 18 months, long enough to be trusted, short enough to be managed. Is Russo Vincent's? I didn't think so. A beat. I'm revising. She leaned forward slightly, ignoring the pull in her lower back. The operational failures, the safe house, the shipments. How many of your men were in those locations? The safe house had 4. His voice was level. 2 of them didn't make it out. She held his gaze. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just help me finish the picture. She reached into the messenger bag and pulled out a second folder, thinner than the first, tucked inside a waterproof sleeve. Marco had a communication log. Not comprehensive. He wasn't stupid enough to keep everything in one place. But there are fragments, dates, and coded identifiers. She laid it on the table. I spent 3 months trying to match the identifiers to people in your organization. I got partial matches on 4. He took the folder. Russo is one of them, she said. Dante opened the folder. She watched him find Russo's identifier. She'd marked it, because she was precise about these things, even when she was running on insufficient sleep and an injured ankle in someone's borrowed suite. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set the folder down with the same precise two-tap alignment as the first stack. 4 months ago, Russo asked to be reassigned from cargo oversight to personal security, he said. Not to her. Thinking aloud, which he never used to do. She wasn't sure if he'd changed or if she was seeing something he'd always kept locked down. I approved it. Vincent recommended it. Of course Vincent recommended it. Russo has been in my immediate rotation for 4 months. They sat with that. It was a specific kind of silence, the kind that had weight in it, the kind that came from two people simultaneously doing the arithmetic on a number that came out somewhere between very bad and catastrophic. If Russo had been in Dante's personal security rotation for 4 months, then the information Vincent had been feeding Marco wasn't just operational. It was intimate, schedules, movements, the kind of detail that turned a Don into a target. They weren't going to wait for the commission gathering, Elena said slowly. Dante looked at her. The gathering is the big move, the public one, the one that takes out multiple heads at once. She was working through it as she spoke, the same way she worked through financial structures, finding the logic underneath the numbers. But if Russo has been in your personal rotation for 4 months and nothing has happened to you yet, they've been holding back. Which means the commission move isn't a contingency. It's the primary plan. She paused. They need you alive until then, because if you die before the gathering, the other families go to ground. The commission cancels. The whole architecture falls apart. They need me to be seen, he said. They need the gathering to happen as scheduled, with me present. With you as the reason everyone is in one place. The room was very quiet again. Dante reached for his phone. He turned it over in his hand once, without unlocking it. A man deciding something. Then he set it face up on the table and looked at her. I need to keep Vincent close for the next 72 hours, he said. If he runs, I lose half the evidence trail. I know. Which means I need to give him something to keep him from running. The marriage, she said. He nodded slowly. If I go downstairs tonight and apologize to Camilla and sign the preliminary documents, Vincent believes everything is back on track. He stays. He keeps the commission plan moving. She looked at him. You'd actually sign? Preliminary papers only. There are provisions, contingencies that would take weeks to finalize. He paused. Enough to keep Enzo cooperative and Vincent comfortable. And Camilla? Camilla deserves an honest conversation. She'll get one. In private, without her father's lawyer in the room. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She was processing something that she didn't immediately name, because naming it felt like crossing into territory she'd deliberately walled off. He was talking about using the marriage as a tactical cover. He was talking about sitting across from a 26-year-old woman and performing a future he'd already privately walked away from, and she understood the operational logic of it completely, and she hated that she understood it. And she hated more that she couldn't find a flaw in it. What happens to me while you're downstairs managing this, she said. You stay here. Father stays in the building. Piero stays on this floor and he's the only one on this floor. He paused. You're not visible, which means Vincent doesn't have to account for you yet. And when he does have to account for me, that's a different problem for a different hour. He stood, reaching for his jacket. The documents stay in this room. Obviously. He paused, jacket in hand, looking at her across the table with its spread of evidence. You said Marco thought he was releasing you as a message. What was the message supposed to be? She looked at the table, then back at him. That he owned you. That the woman who knew your empire better than anyone, carrying your child, that she came back to you on his terms, not yours. She paused. He thought I'd try to negotiate. Give you some of the documents in exchange for protection and keep the rest as insurance for myself. He doesn't know you very well. No, she said. He knows how to frighten people. That's different from knowing them. Dante looked at her. He thought 5 months would break me down into someone predictable, she said. He forgot that I had more time in a room with you before that, learning to think about all the angles. She said it without warmth, without anything that resembled sentiment, just the fact of it. You taught me to play the whole board. He only saw the pieces. Something happened in Dante's face that he didn't fully suppress before she saw it. It was brief, a second, less, but it was there. She categorized it and sealed the category and moved on. "I'll be back within 2 hours," he said. "Don't open this door for anyone but Piero or Favre." "I know how to stay in a room, Dante." "I know you do." He paused at the door. The ankle, "Go manage your alliance." He went. She heard the door close. She heard his footsteps moving down the corridor. Even, unhurried, the walk of a man who was composing his face and his posture into something the people downstairs needed to see. She heard the elevator open and close. She sat in the quiet and drank the rest of the electrolyte solution and looked at the documents spread across the table, and she let herself have 30 seconds of something that she wouldn't have called fear, but was fear's close cousin, the kind that lived in the gap between what you'd calculated and what you couldn't control. She had given Dante Moretti everything she had, every piece of leverage, every document, every carefully assembled record of 7 months of betrayal and conspiracy. She had laid it all on a table in a room she couldn't leave and given it to the man who had already sacrificed her once when the math required it. She was betting that the math was different now. She was betting on a man who had spent 20 years being exactly as ruthless as the job required and not 1 degree less. She was betting that a daughter and a conspiracy that touched his blood and 2 dead men in a safe house that he hadn't known were burned until tonight. She was betting that the sum of those things added up to something she could work with. It was not a comfortable bet. She pulled the messenger bag onto her lap. There was one thing she hadn't put on the table, one document she hadn't laid out with the others. She'd told herself it was strategic, information held back as insurance. She'd believed that for about 3 minutes before acknowledging the real reason. It was the one piece of information that changed not just Dante's position, but hers. The one piece that she wasn't ready to negotiate with yet. She reached into the interior pocket of the bag, past the waterproof sleeve, and pulled out a folded envelope. She held it in her hands without opening it. She'd opened it once, 2 months ago, when Marco had left it on her desk as a demonstration. She hadn't needed to open it since. She remembered every word. It was a letter, handwritten, from Vincent Caruso to Marco Salvatore, dated 4 months before Elena had been removed from the Moretti organization. She'd spent 2 months thinking about what that date meant, 4 months before her removal. Which meant the conversation about removing her had happened, had been initiated, not by the Varelli marriage negotiations, not by Dante's political calculations, but by someone who needed her gone before she could find what she'd eventually found. The letter wasn't about the commission plan. It wasn't about shipment routes or safe houses. It was about her. Specifically, it was Vincent Caruso explaining to Marco Salvatore exactly who Elena Romano was, exactly what she knew about the Moretti financial architecture, and exactly what she would be worth to the right buyer, once she was outside Dante's protection. Vincent hadn't just helped remove her from the organization. He had sold her to Marco before she'd even left. She folded the envelope back along its creases. She set it in the bag. She closed the bag. Downstairs, Dante Moretti was sitting across from a woman he was about to half marry for the sake of keeping a traitor comfortable and a 72-hour window intact. He thought he knew the full shape of Vincent's betrayal. He thought the documents on the table were the complete picture. He didn't know about the letter. He didn't know that the man he was about to smile at across a table of preliminary contracts had engineered Elena's removal from his life, specifically to deliver her to Marco, had done it 8 months ago, methodically, using Dante's own political anxieties as the mechanism, had used the Varelli marriage as the excuse and Dante as the instrument. She hadn't decided yet whether to tell him, not because she was protecting Vincent, not because she had any remaining interest in calibrating Dante's emotions, but because the moment he knew, the moment it was real to him that Vincent had used him as a weapon against her, specifically, deliberately, she wasn't sure she could predict what Dante Moretti would do. And an unpredictable Dante Moretti in a building that also contained Vincent Caruso and a Varelli security detail, and her, 7 months pregnant with a wrapped ankle in a third-floor suite, was a variable she needed to think through before she introduced it. She was still thinking when her phone, the one she'd bought with cash in a transit hub 6 days ago, the one only one person in the world had the number for, vibrated once on the couch cushion beside her. She looked at the screen. One message. No name. Just a number she recognized because she'd memorized it and then deleted it, which was what you did when the number was dangerous. The message said, She's with him now, isn't she? I thought she might find her way there. Tell the Don I said hello. And tell him the window he thinks he has is already closed. She read it twice. Then she looked at the door, and at the documents on the table, and at the bag in her lap, and she thought, Vincent already knows. He had known before Dante came through those terminal doors. He had known, or suspected, and had said nothing, had stood on the tarmac and spoken about schedules and contracts and straightforward evenings with his careful, loyal eyes, because a man running a 7-month conspiracy doesn't react to surprises. He absorbs them and recalculates. He was recalculating right now. And Dante was downstairs in the same building, within 50 meters of the man who had already decided what to do with him, sitting at a table trying to manage a marriage alliance that Vincent now knew was being used as cover. And he didn't know the window was closed, and she was the only person in this building. Not fast. She couldn't do fast. Not with the ankle and the weight she was carrying and the specific gravity of 7 months of accumulated damage to a body that had been running on insufficient everything for too long. But she moved with the kind of deliberate urgency that didn't waste motion, because she had learned in the last 5 months that panic was a luxury and motion was a tool. And the difference between the two was whether you survived what came next. She crossed to the suite door and opened it. Piero was in the corridor, 4 feet away, and he turned with the trained reflex of a man whose hand went to his jacket before his brain caught up. He saw it was her, and the hand came back down. He was young, 24, maybe 25, with a careful face that didn't give much away. She had decided in the elevator that he was probably good at his job. "I need to reach Dante," she said, "right now. Mr. Moretti is downstairs with I know where he is. I need you to get a message to him without going through the internal comm system." Piero looked at her, processing. "Not the radio," she said, "not the building system. Nothing that routes through the East Corridor or any station Vincent Caruso has access to." She held the phone up so he could see the screen without taking it from her. "Read it." He read it. His face did something careful and controlled, and then settled back into neutral, but she'd seen the shift underneath. He understood what he was looking at. "Your personal cell," she said. "Direct to his. Now." He already had the phone out. She stood in the doorway and listened to him make the call. 3 words, clipped. 3rd floor, now. And then she went back inside and stood in the center of the room and looked at the documents on the table and the envelope in the bag on the couch, and did the arithmetic on how much time they had and what the numbers came out to. The numbers were not good. Vincent's message hadn't been a threat. It had been a demonstration. He was showing her that he knew exactly where she was, exactly who she was with, and that he had already decided the next move. Men who were still calculating didn't send messages like that. Men who had finished calculating and were executing sent messages like that. The 72-hour window Dante had been planning around didn't exist. She heard the elevator at the end of the corridor. Then footsteps. One set, fast, not bothering with the measured pace he'd left with 20 minutes ago. The door opened and Dante came through it with his jacket still on and his eyes already doing the sweep of the room that told her Piero had given him enough. He saw her face. He saw the phone in her hand. He crossed to her and she held the screen up without preamble and watched him read. He read it once. Then he took the phone from her hand, not grabbing, just taking, the way you took something you needed to look at more carefully, and read it again. She watched his face do the thing it did when it was processing something that required a fundamental restructuring of the plan. It wasn't panic. It wasn't even surprise, exactly. It was the expression of a man who had been running one chess game and had just understood he was sitting at a different board entirely. "When did this come in?" he said. 4 minutes ago. He had the number. He had the number. Which means he's had eyes on you since before you came off that transport. He set the phone on the table. He didn't just know you were coming, he directed you here. She had reached that conclusion 30 seconds before he said it, and it had not gotten easier in the intervening 30 seconds. He knew you'd be at the airfield for the Virelli arrival. He knew if I appeared there, you'd... She stopped. He used me as the delivery mechanism. The documents, the evidence against him, he let me take them. He knew I'd bring them straight to you. Dante looked at her. He wanted you to have the documents, she said. He wanted you to see them tonight, here, in this building, while he's 40 meters away and your attention is split between a marriage alliance and me and a conspiracy you think you have 72 hours to manage. She kept her voice level because the alternative was something she didn't have room for. He's not afraid of the evidence. He has a counter to it already prepared. What counter? I don't know yet. Think. She did. She stood in the center of the room and she thought, the way she'd learned to think working alongside him, not from the emotional surface, but from the structural logic underneath, the architecture of incentives and risks, and what a man like Vincent Caruso would need in order to walk into a building where his target had just received proof of his betrayal and feel confident rather than cornered. He needs a version of events, she said slowly, a counter-narrative that neutralizes the documents, something that makes your family question the evidence before they can act on it. She paused. He'd need corroboration, someone else in the building tonight who can support his version. Russo, possibly. But Russo is too junior. He'd need someone the family respects. She looked at him. Who else is in this building tonight? Dante was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. The Virelli lawyer, he said. Enzo sent his personal lawyer, a man named Castellano. He's been the Virelli family's legal counsel for 15 years. And how long have you known that Enzo is the one who pushed hardest for this marriage alliance? Another silence. Different quality this time. You think Enzo is part of it, he said. I think the Virelli alliance didn't come from nowhere. I think someone sold Enzo the idea that marrying his daughter to you was the fastest path to expanding his network. And I think that someone needed you committed to the alliance before tonight, so that when everything came apart, you'd be isolated, politically, diplomatically, without the alliances you gave up to get here. She picked up the messenger bag and reached for the envelope. And I think I've been sitting on something I should have shown you an hour ago. She held it out. He took it. He unfolded it. She watched him read, and she watched the moment he hit the date, the specific date, 4 months before her removal, because that was the moment his face changed in a way that was different from every other change she'd watched it make tonight. This one went somewhere she hadn't seen before, somewhere below the operational layer, below the controlled processing, into something that didn't have a professional face on it. He read to the end. He read it again. He set it on the table with the other documents, except he didn't do the 2-tap alignment this time. He just set it down. He sold you to Salvatore, he said, before I left, before you made the decision to remove me. Vincent had already brokered the arrangement. She kept her voice steady. You didn't decide to push me out because the Virelli marriage required it. You decided because Vincent managed the information you had access to. He made the marriage look like a reason. He made the timing look coincidental. She paused. You were the mechanism, Dante. He used your ambition and your political instincts and your capacity to make cold calculations, and he ran me through you like a transaction. The room was so quiet she could hear the ventilation system. She could hear her own heartbeat, which was doing something elevated and insistent that the doctor had told her to avoid. Dante's hands were on the table, flat, fingers spread. He was looking at the letter. Say something, she said. I'm thinking. Think out loud. He looked up. His eyes were different than they'd been all evening, Chuck. Not colder, which would have been the predictable direction, but something stranger. Something that looked, in the insufficient sweet lighting, like a man who had been operating inside a structure he trusted and had just watched the structure become a different shape entirely while he was standing in it. I removed you, he said, because Vincent told me the Virelli family had run a background check and flagged your name in connection with the Bellini operation 3 years ago. He told me Enzo Virelli had personally requested your removal as a condition of the alliance. She stared at him. I had it verified, he said. 2 independent sources confirmed the Virelli request. What 2 sources? Castillo in my intelligence division, and Ferro, who handles the European communications. She picked up the thin folder from the table, the one with the coded identifiers, and turned 3 pages in and pointed without speaking. He looked at where her finger was resting. 2 identifiers. Side by side in a communication log dated 6 months ago. He'd seen them when he'd read the folder the first time. He'd moved past them, because at that point he hadn't matched all the identifiers yet. He looked at them now and matched them. Castillo. Pharaoh. He straightened up slowly. 4 months before I was removed, she said, Vincent had already arranged my sale to Marco, but he needed a mechanism to get me out of your organization without you questioning it. So he fabricated a condition from the Virelli side, used your own network to corroborate it through people he'd already recruited, and let you make the decision yourself. She paused. He's been doing this the whole time, not forcing outcomes, curating the information you receive until you reach the conclusion he needs. Dante was looking at the wall behind her, not seeing the wall, seeing something else. She understood what he was seeing. He was reviewing 22 years of decisions through a new lens, and the review was happening fast, and it was violent in the way that certain kinds of understanding were violent. The Ferrano attribution, he said, the 2 men we lost in the safe house, were casualties of a plan he needed you to blame on someone else, to keep you looking in the wrong direction while he finished the commission architecture. Their names were Pinto and De Rosa. He said it to the wall. Pinto had a son, 8 months old. She said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. He turned. He picked up his phone and dialed and held it to his ear, and when it connected, she heard him say very quietly, "Find me Castillo and Pharaoh, right now, both of them. Don't tell them why." A pause. "No, don't use the radio." He ended the call and looked at her. "I need to go back downstairs. Dante, I need to be visible. I need Vincent to believe the timeline he's running is still intact." He picked up the documents from the table, all of them, in a single organized motion, and crossed to the room's safe built into the closet wall, opened it with a code she didn't watch him enter, and placed everything inside. He left the envelope on top, last. He closed the safe. "You stay here. You just told me downstairs that Vincent has already adjusted his timeline." "I know. Which means whatever he's planning, it's not 72 hours from now. It could be tonight." "I know that too." Then going downstairs and pretending, "I'm not pretending anything." He turned from the safe. "I'm going downstairs to have a direct conversation with Vincent Caruso, and I need to do it in a room where I control the exits, with my own people in position, before he decides to move somewhere I can't manage." He paused. "If he believes his message rattled you enough to make you bring me back up here, he'll think he has the initiative. I need him to believe that for another 30 minutes. She looked at him. "And what happens in 30 minutes? 30 minutes is enough time for Piero to move the right people into position." He was already at the door. "Lock this door. Don't open it for anyone." "You said that an hour ago and you were wrong about the timeline." He stopped with his hand on the door. He looked back at her. Not the operational look, not the calculating look, something that had less structure to it than those, something she recognized from a different version of this room, in a different city, in a year that felt like it belonged to people they no longer were. "I know what I did," he said, 8 months ago. "Whatever Vincent engineered, I made the calculation. I could have looked harder. I didn't." He held her eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive it tonight." "Good," she said, "because I'm not." "I know." He paused. "But I need you to trust that for the next 30 minutes, I'm not making the same kind of calculation, whatever it costs." She held his gaze for a long moment. "Go," she said. He went. She locked the door. She stood in the center of the room and breathed deliberately, counting the breaths the way Favre had shown her. 4 counts in, hold for 4, release for 4. Because her blood pressure was already elevated and the last 30 minutes had not helped that particular problem. She counted to 4 3 times and then stopped, because counting wasn't what the situation required and she knew it. She went to the window. Below her, the tarmac was still lit from the aircraft that had brought the Virelli family. She could see 2 of Dante's men near the perimeter, stationed correctly, nothing in their posture that suggested they knew anything was wrong. Standard positioning, which either meant Piero had been very quiet about the repositioning Dante had just ordered, or the repositioning hadn't happened yet, or... Her phone vibrated. Same number. She looked at the screen. "Downstairs isn't where the problem is. Check the floor you're on." She turned from the window. The suite door was locked. She'd locked it herself, deadbolt engaged, security chain in place. Piero was in the corridor. There was one other door in the suite, the service entrance at the back of the kitchenette, which she hadn't checked because she'd had no reason to check it an hour ago when the room was prepared by Piero's people and Dante was still operating on a 72-hour window. She crossed the suite in 8 steps, moving faster than she should have, ankle protesting, and pushed through the kitchenette doorway and saw the service door and saw that the security bar on the inside was not engaged. It had been engaged when Favre left. She had heard the doctor ask the female staff member to check the secondary entrance. She had heard the woman confirm it. She looked at the bar leaning against the wall beside the door, not across it, and understood that someone had come through after Favre left, and before Dante came back upstairs, and had been very quiet about it, and was now somewhere in the suite that she hadn't cleared. She backed out of the kitchenette, the bedroom. She turned and a man was standing in the bedroom doorway. Not Russo, not anyone she recognized from the files she'd memorized in Marco's compound. He was medium height, nondescript in the specific way of men trained to be nondescript, and he was not holding a weapon yet, which told her he'd been sent to retrieve something rather than to hurt someone. He was looking at her with the assessing calm of a professional who had walked into a room expecting it to be empty. They looked at each other for 1 second. "The bag," he said. "It's on the couch." She kept her voice level. "It's empty. I already moved everything." His eyes went to the couch. The bag was there, where she'd left it. He couldn't verify from the doorway whether it was empty. "Then you won't mind if I look?" "Help yourself." He moved toward the couch, keeping her in his peripheral vision, 2 meters of distance between them, and she moved at the same moment, not toward the suite door but toward the room's safe in the closet. She didn't have the code. She didn't need the code. She needed the safe to be between her and him, and she needed the sound she was about to make. She hit the closet door with her palm, hard, loud, the slam of it carrying through a suite with good acoustic transfer, and shouted Piero's name at a volume that cost her something in her chest and didn't matter at all. The man at the couch moved. She dropped below the closet door frame, not graceful, the ankle giving slightly, one hand catching the door edge, and the man's trajectory carried him past her into the closet wall. She heard Piero hitting the suite door from outside, heard the chain catching, heard him call her name through the gap. "Service entrance," she said, loud, clear. Someone came through the service entrance. The man recovered faster than she'd calculated. Professionals always did. And he turned and his hand came up with something she'd been wrong about. He had brought a weapon, and she'd been wrong. And the weight of her own miscalculation was specific and cold in the half-second she had to process it. The suite door came off the chain. Piero came through it low and fast, and the sequence that followed was brief and loud, and she pressed herself into the closet doorframe with her arms across her stomach and her face turned away. And when it was over, there was a man on the floor of her suite making a sound that meant he was alive and incapacitated, and Piero was breathing hard with his weapon drawn and looking at her. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She checked herself. Her hands were shaking. She registered this as information rather than reacting to it. "I'm not hurt. The baby is—" She put her hand against her stomach and waited and felt movement and breathed. "We're fine." Piero was already on his phone. She heard him talking to someone. Not the radio, a personal line. Words she was processing at a slight delay because her brain was running a half-second behind her body's adrenaline. She heard him say Dante's name and heard the words third floor and contained, and then she stopped listening to Piero and started listening to everything else. She heard distantly from somewhere below the floor she was standing on, a sound she'd heard before in a different context, and recognized now with the specific clarity of something your body knows before your mind catches up. It was not a single sound. It was several sounds in rapid sequence, beginning with what might have been a door and ending with something that wasn't a door. The floor under her feet did not shake. She was not in a building with insufficient structure, but something in the transmission of the air through the ventilation system changed, and Piero stopped talking mid-sentence and looked at the ceiling, and they both stood in the wreckage of her suite and understood simultaneously that 30 minutes had been the wrong number. Dante had not had 30 minutes. She moved to the window. Below, on the east side of the building, 2 of Dante's perimeter men were running toward the main entrance in a direction that meant they'd been called in from outside, which meant the inside was which meant Dante was. She turned to Piero. "Where is he?" she said. Piero's phone was at his ear. His face had gone to a specific kind of still that she associated with men receiving information they were trying to keep neutral while they processed it. "Piero." Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, harder than she'd known she had available right now. "Where is Dante?" He lowered the phone slowly. "East corridor," he said. "Ground floor." "Is he—" "He's alive." Piero's voice was precise. There was an altercation. Vincent." He stopped. "Russo and 2 others moved on him in the corridor. He's contained the situation, but..." He stopped again. "But what?" "Vincent isn't there." She stared at him. "He wasn't in the building," Piero said. "When Dante went down to find him, Vincent was gone. He'd been gone for at least 20 minutes. He looked at her and she could see him assembling the information into the same shape she was assembling it into. "The man in your suite wasn't sent to retrieve the bag, Ms. Romano. He was sent to confirm you were still in the building." She heard what he wasn't saying. Vincent had never intended to move during the commission gathering. That was the architecture he'd let her see, the plan she'd analyzed and delivered to Dante with the confidence of someone who had correctly read the evidence. The commission plan was real, but it was the secondary plan, the contingency. The primary plan was tonight, and she had walked through a terminal building carrying proof of it and handed it to the one man whose death would set it in motion, and she had helped Vincent's people confirm her location, and she had spent the last 2 hours in this suite while the building organized itself around the thing that was actually happening, and all of it, the message, the timing, the man through the service entrance, was not Vincent panicking. It was Vincent executing. She crossed the room to the safe. "What's the code?" she said to Piero. "I don't have— Get Dante on the phone and get me the code." She put her hands on the safe door. "Right now." Because if Vincent was gone, if he'd been gone for 20 minutes before Dante went downstairs to find him, then he hadn't run. Men running didn't send demonstration messages. Men running didn't send someone to confirm her location. Men running didn't leave a primary target alive after a corridor confrontation that 2 trained men in Russo couldn't finish. Vincent had left the building because the next phase of the plan required him to be somewhere else. She knew where. She'd read the commission documents twice. She'd memorized the guest list, the arrival windows, the security arrangements. She'd handed all of it to Dante and watched him put it in the safe, and she'd thought, this is the evidence that stops the plan. She had been thinking about it wrong. The commission gathering was in 48 hours. The guest list Vincent had provided to Marco included 7 heads of family, their primary security details, and the location, a private estate 40 minutes north of the city, registered in the same kind of shell company architecture as this airfield, owned on paper by no one real. But Vincent had provided that list to Marco 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks was enough time to change the location. 7 weeks was enough time to move the gathering somewhere the evidence in the safe no longer described. She had given Dante a map to the wrong place, and she hadn't known it was wrong until this moment. And if she was correct, if the location had been changed and Vincent was already moving toward it, then what she'd handed Dante tonight wasn't evidence that would save his life. It was the reason he'd be looking in the wrong direction when Vincent moved. The phone Piero was holding went to speaker. Dante's voice, tight and controlled, with the specific quality of a man who had just been in a fight and was running on the other side of it. "Elena." "The gathering location," she said. "The estate and the documents. Did you independently verify it?" A pause. "The address came from the files you— Did you verify it from a second source?" Longer pause. "No," he said. She pressed her forehead against the cold steel of the safe door and closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "The location has been changed," she said. "Vincent gave Marco the original address weeks ago, knowing you'd find the documents eventually. The real gathering is somewhere else." She opened her eyes. "And he's already moving." The silence on the phone lasted 2 seconds, which was a long time for Dante Moretti. "How do you know?" he said. "Because he left the building," she said. "And he left you alive in that corridor. And he doesn't make mistakes, Dante. You told me that yourself 3 years ago when you were explaining why you trusted him." She straightened up from the safe. He left you alive because he needs you to go to the wrong location. He needs you moving toward an empty estate 40 minutes north. Because he left the building, she said, and he left you alive in that corridor. And he doesn't make mistakes, Dante. You told me that yourself 3 years ago when you were explaining why you trusted him. He left you alive because he needs you to go to the wrong location. He needs you moving toward an empty estate 40 minutes north, while the real gathering happens somewhere else, and every family head on that list walks into a room that Vincent has already prepared. The silence on the phone stretched 3 seconds. 4. Get downstairs, Dante said. Now. She was already moving. Piero was beside her before she reached the suite door, hand not touching her arm, but close enough to catch her if the ankle gave, which she registered and didn't comment on because there wasn't time to comment on anything. They went through the door and down the corridor, and she took the stairs rather than waiting for the elevator because stairs were faster and the elevator was a box, and she was done with boxes for the evening. The stairwell was concrete and industrial, and her footsteps echoed in it, and Piero's footsteps echoed behind her, and she counted the flights by feel because she was watching the door below, not the stairs. And when she pushed through the ground floor door into the east corridor, she saw Dante immediately. He was standing 15 feet away with his jacket gone and his shirt pulled open at the collar and a cut along his left forearm that someone had already wrapped in a pressure bandage that was doing its job adequately but not elegantly. 2 of his men were with him. On the floor of the corridor 10 feet further down, Russo was face down with his hands zip-tied behind him and the specific stillness of a man who had stopped arguing with the situation. A second man she didn't recognize was similarly positioned near the wall. Dante looked at her when she came through the door. His eyes went to the ankle, to her face, back to her face. "I'm fine," she said, before he could ask. "Where's the third?" "What third?" "Russo and 1 other on the floor. You said 2 others moved on you." Something shifted in his expression. The third didn't stay. She understood. She filed it and moved on. "We need to find the real location. Who in your organization would know about a change to the commission venue? Who handles the logistics for that level of meeting?" "My protocol officer, a man named Bianchi." "Is he clean?" "He wasn't in the files." "That doesn't make him clean." "No," Dante said. "It doesn't." He turned to the taller of the 2 men beside him, 50s, heavy-built, with a face that had absorbed a lot of weather. "Aldo, get Bianchi in a room. Don't tell him why. Don't let him make any calls first." Aldo moved. Dante looked back at Elena. In the fluorescent corridor light, she could see the full extent of what the last hour had done to him. Not physically, though the arm was real enough. Something in the arrangement of his face, the places where the controlled surface had worn thin. She'd seen him in difficult situations before, in the 2 years she'd worked beside him, and she'd seen the control hold through all of them. She was seeing it hold now, but she was also seeing what it was costing to hold it, which she had not seen before. "The Enzo Varelli piece," he said. "Walk me through your reasoning." "Not here." He looked at the corridor, at Russo on the floor, at the second man, at the 2 remaining guards. "Conference room, 20 meters." They moved. Piero stayed outside the door. Dante closed it behind them, and she didn't wait for him to sit. Neither of them sat. She stood on the opposite side of the small table and laid it out the way she'd been assembling it upstairs. "Vincent needed the Varelli alliance to happen," she said. "He needed you committed to it, politically and financially, for a specific reason. It isolated you. The families you'd maintained independent relationships with, you distanced from in order to consolidate with Varelli. The operational redundancies you'd built, you streamlined because the alliance made them seem unnecessary." She paused. "He used the alliance to reduce your options before he moved. Enzo was part of this. I think Enzo was sold the same story Vincent sold you, a slightly different version. Enzo was told the marriage would expand his network. He was told you were eager for it. The alliance was real from Enzo's perspective. It served him." She paused. "But Castellano, the lawyer Enzo sent tonight, Castellano has been in communication with a contact I found in Marco's files, a contact who appears twice in Vincent's communication log." Dante looked at the table surface, thinking. Castellano was sent to witness the signing tonight, he said. If the signing happened, if I signed preliminary documents and Enzo's lawyer was present, it would be on record that the Moretti-Varelli alliance was formally initiated, which would be read by every other family as you having chosen the Varelli network over your independent position, making the alliance the last thing I did before the commission gathering, and making it look, after the fact, like you'd leveraged the gathering to benefit a specific alliance rather than maintain the commission's neutrality. She let him get there himself because he was faster than she was at this specific kind of political geometry, and she could see him arriving. Every family at the gathering would have reason to question my motives, he said quietly. The commission operates on the principle that no single family controls the agenda. If I walked in having just formalized the Varelli alliance, you'd walk in already suspected, already vulnerable to the argument that the commission should operate without you. And if something happened to you during the gathering, it would look like consequence rather than assassination. She nodded. He stood with his hands on the table and looked at them. She watched him take the full architecture of it in. 22 years of a man standing beside him, watching, learning, filing every vulnerability, and then constructing a plan so precisely fitted to Dante's own decision-making patterns that it was essentially a trap built from his own character. He knew you'd prioritize the alliance over personal caution, she said. He knew you'd read the Varelli marriage as the rational move and execute it. He's been watching you make decisions for 22 years. He knows how you think. He does, Dante said. He knows exactly how I think. He looked up. Which is why he didn't account for the thing he doesn't know how to predict. She waited. Me making a decision he couldn't model, he said. She understood what he meant. He meant the tarmac. He meant the moment he'd walked away from the Varelli arrival and crossed a terminal building toward a woman he'd spent 8 months trying to make into a closed account. He meant the decision that had no clean operational logic to it, that broke the pattern Vincent had spent years studying. He didn't plan for you, she said. No. He planned for the version of me that would have kept walking to that plane. He straightened. That version would have signed the documents tonight and gone to the wrong estate tomorrow and walked into whatever he'd prepared there. Efficiently. On schedule. The door opened. Aldo leaned in. Bianchi is in room 4. Dante moved for the door. Elena followed. He glanced back at her, a question in it. I'm coming, she said. I know what questions to ask. He didn't argue. Room 4 was smaller than the conference room. A utility space repurposed, folding chairs, a table that had lived a hard life. Bianchi was sitting in one of the chairs with the posture of a man who'd been told nothing and was processing the specific anxiety of being brought somewhere without explanation. He was mid-40s, slight build, with the neat, careful look of someone who organized other people's logistics for a living and had developed a personal aesthetic to match. He saw Dante and stood. Then he saw Elena, and something complicated happened in his face. Recognition, recalibration, a flash of something she couldn't immediately read. He knew who she was. Sit, Dante said. Bianchi sat. The commission gathering, Dante said. The current confirmed location. Bianchi's eyes moved, not to Elena, not to Aldo at the door, to his own hands, briefly, which was the kind of tell that meant the question had landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to be able to reach. He recovered quickly. The Castellano estate. North of the city? 40? That's the location in the circulation documents, Dante said. I'm asking about the current confirmed location. A pause. That is the current... Bianchi. Dante's voice dropped in a way that wasn't louder but was significantly more present. I'm going to ask you once more. After that, I'm going to ask Aldo, and Aldo doesn't ask questions the same way I do. Bianchi's hands tightened on the table edge. Elena watched his face run through several options and arrive at the one that looked most like self-preservation. The Castellano estate location was rotated 3 weeks ago, he said. Standard security protocol. Rotating the confirmed venue 6 weeks out, and again 3 weeks out to prevent intelligence from reaching hostile parties, Dante said. Yes, I know the protocol. I created the protocol. A beat. Who authorized the second rotation? The protocol authorizes automatic rotation on who confirmed the new location to the attending families. Bianchi's mouth closed, opened. Mr. Caruso handles commission communications at the coordination level. Who received the updated location. The room was very quiet. All attending parties received the updated coordination package, Bianchi said. He was choosing his words with the care of a man walking on ice he's not sure about. Through the standard secure channel. All attending parties, Elena said, including Marco Salvatore's representative. Bianchi looked at her. She watched him decide something. She watched him decide wrong. Marco Salvatore is not a commission attendee. His family was excluded from the commission roster 4 years ago but his representative received the package, she said, through a secondary forward, something in the secure channel architecture that routes a copy to an address that isn't on the official distribution list. He stared at her. I spent 3 months inside Marco Salvatore's financial operation, she said. I know what his incoming intelligence looks like. I know the metadata on his commission-related files. She leaned forward slightly, ignoring the pull in her back. The forward exists, and you built it, and you've been maintaining it for how long? The ice Bianchi had been walking on ran out. He said nothing, which was, in its way, everything. Dante straightened from the table. He looked at Bianchi with an expression that had gone to a place past anger, a place where anger wasn't necessary because the conclusion was clear and conclusions didn't require emotion. The real location, he said, now. If you don't tell me, the next conversation you have is with Aldo, and the conversation after that is with no one, because there isn't one. He said it without inflection. A forecast, not a threat. The location. Bianchi looked at the table, at his hands, at the table again. He was running the arithmetic on his own situation and arriving at the number Elena had already calculated for him. He was in a room with Dante Moretti. His access to Vincent was gone. The man who'd been running him was no longer in the building, and the protection he'd been promised was 30 minutes ago. Villa Serrano, he said. Quiet. Private estate on the Ligurian coast, 2 hours south. Arrival windows. Family heads begin arriving at 0400. Full assembly by 06. Elena looked at the clock on the wall. It was 23 minutes past midnight. 3 hours and 37 minutes. She did the arithmetic. 2 hours to reach the Ligurian coast. That left 90 minutes, less accounting for mobilization time, to assemble, move, and be in position before the first family head arrived at a location that Vincent had prepared specifically to function as a killing ground while every significant power in the criminal world was inside it. She looked at Dante. He was already looking at her. She could see him running the same numbers and arriving at the same margin and doing what she was also doing, not dwelling on the tightness of it, because dwelling was a luxury and they were 90 minutes from running out of luxuries entirely. Aldo, he said. Get everyone we can move in 40 minutes into vehicles, armed for a hardened approach. I want Favre and 2 others staying with Miss Romano in this building. He held up a hand before Aldo could respond. Not a request. I'm not staying in this building, Elena said. Elena, I'm the only person in your organization who has been inside Marco Salvatore's operation for 5 months. She kept her voice level and precise. I know his security architecture. I know how he layers his perimeter. I know the 2 spots in any fortified position where he puts his most trusted people because I watched him do it 4 times. She held Dante's eyes. You don't have time to brief your team on any of that. You need me in a vehicle telling your people what they're walking into. You are 7 months pregnant with an injured ankle. I'm also the reason you know about any of this. I'm also the reason you have 3 hours and 37 minutes instead of 0. She paused. I'll stay in the vehicle. I'll provide intelligence. I won't set foot outside it. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see the argument assembling itself, and she could see him running the operational calculus on it, and she could see exactly when the calculus landed on the truth, which was that she was right, and he knew she was right, and neither of them had the time for him to pretend otherwise. In the vehicle, he said. In the vehicle. He turned to Aldo. Move. The next 22 minutes were organized chaos of the specific kind that Dante's organization ran on. Not loud, Not frantic, but dense with motion, with people appearing and disappearing on assignments that had been processed and delegated in under 60 seconds. Elena sat in the conference room with Piero and watched through the window as the tarmac began to fill with men she recognized as the close-in tier of Dante's operation. Not foot soldiers, not perimeter staff. The people he kept within arm's reach for situations that required a particular kind of resolution. There were 14 of them. She counted because counting was useful, because knowing what resources you had was the first step in knowing what you could do with them. 14 men, armed and moving with the efficiency of people who had done this kind of deployment before. 3 vehicles, large, black, the kind of SUVs that were heavier than they looked and had modifications she didn't need to ask about to understand. Dante moved among them with his arm rebandaged by someone who'd clearly done field work before. Jacket replaced, speaking in the low-clipped exchanges of a man distributing a plan he'd assembled in his own head in the last 20 minutes. She watched him and thought about the letter in the safe upstairs. The letter from Vincent to Marco, dated 4 months before her removal. She thought about what Dante had said in the conference room. He knew exactly how I think. And she thought about what it meant to have someone know how you think and use it against you for 7 months without detection. She thought about Pinto and DeRosa, a dead man and a son 8 months old. She thought about the fact that she had handed Dante a map to the wrong location and hadn't known it was wrong, and that if Bianchi hadn't cracked, if he'd held the line for another hour, another 30 minutes, they would have mobilized toward an empty estate, while every powerful criminal family in the network walked into Villa Serrano and whatever Vincent had built inside it. Piero appeared at the door. "We're ready." She stood, slowly because fast wasn't available, but without hesitation. She picked up the messenger bags. There was nothing left in it that mattered. The safe had everything, but she wasn't leaving it, and walked to the door and through it and down the corridor toward the tarmac doors with Piero a half step behind her. Dante met her at the vehicle. He opened the rear door without ceremony, and she got in, and he got in beside her, and the door closed, and the convoy began moving before she'd finished settling, and the airfield perimeter lights blurred past the window as they accelerated toward the access road. Inside the vehicle, it was dark except for the ambient light from the front. One man driving, one in the passenger seat, both facing forward. Dante was on his phone. She looked out the window at the October night and thought about what Villa Serrano would look like in 3.5 hours, what Marco's people would look like deployed through a coastal estate, where the approaches would be, where the vulnerabilities were, where the 2 positions were that Marco always filled with his most reliable people, because she had watched him place them 4 times in 4 different locations, and the pattern was consistent in the way that all entrenched habits were consistent. "The approaches to his primary position," she said. "He favors elevation on the north side and water on the south. Every location I saw him use, he put his most trusted people at those 2 points. The north elevation, because it gives line of sight to the main access road. The south water approach, because it's the one most people underestimate." Dante lowered his phone, listening. If Villa Serrano has a coastal cliff on the south side, which it does, I looked it up before Marco moved us there for a week 3 months ago. He'll have 2 people on the cliff approach who are not standard perimeter. They won't respond to a frontal engagement on the north. They're watching the water. She paused. "Your people need to take the cliff approach first before anything moves on the north elevation. Otherwise, the moment there's contact on the main approach, the cliff team calls it and Marco knows the count and the direction." Dante was watching her. "I know," she said. "I know his operation." "You spent 3 months mapping it." "I spent 3 months surviving it," she said. "The mapping was what I did with the time left over." She looked out the window. The airfield was behind them now. The city ahead, dark in the way cities were dark at midnight when you were moving through their edges towards something that was going to happen before sunrise. "He kept me in the main house. He thought it was control, keeping me where he could account for me. He didn't understand that the main house is where everything meets. Every report, every coordination, every security rotation. I had a window and I had time, and I'm very good at remembering things." "I know you are," Dante said. She didn't look at him. She looked at the passing dark and thought about the daughter she was carrying and the arithmetic of the next 3 hours, and what it would cost if the arithmetic was wrong. The vehicle hit the main road, and the engine note changed as the driver accelerated to highway speed, and the city began to consolidate around them. And Elena Romano sat in the back of a car belonging to the most feared man in the criminal world, 7 months pregnant and ankle-wrapped and running on insufficient everything. And she thought, this is the thing I didn't plan for. Not Vincent's architecture, not the wrong location, not the man in her suite, or the message on the phone, or the letter that had rewritten 8 months of history in 30 seconds. She hadn't planned for the moment she'd told Piero to call Dante's direct line instead of the building system, which was the moment she'd chosen which way to run. She'd told herself it was operational. He needed to know about the message. She was the only one who could reach him. The logic was clean and the sentiment was irrelevant. She was a precise enough thinker to know that was only partly true. Beside her in the dark, Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned the screen so she could see it. A message from a number without a name. A photograph. Low resolution, taken from a distance with a long lens. A coastal estate. Stone walls, terraced grounds dropping toward a cliff edge, a main house with its lights on, against the dark water behind it. And below the photograph, 3 words. I'm already here. She stared at the image. The estate had a north elevation with a clear line to the main approach road. It had a southern cliff above dark water. It had a main house with its windows lit from inside, which meant people were already moving through it, preparing it, filling the positions she'd just described. She had described Marco's pattern to Dante. Marco had sent the photograph to show them the pattern was already deployed. He knew what she'd told Dante. He knew because the vehicle she was sitting in had been prepared by people who moved through Dante's organization, and Vincent had been in that organization for 22 years. And 22 years was long enough to put a listener somewhere she hadn't thought to check. She looked at the seat in front of her, at the door panel, at the space between her seat and Dante's. Stop the car, she said. Dante looked at her. Stop the car right now and get everyone out, she said. This vehicle is compromised. The driver was already reacting. Dante's hand was already moving to his shoulder with a single sharp tap that meant exactly what she'd said. And the SUV was pulling to the highway shoulder before she finished the sentence, and the doors were opening, and the cold night air hit her face, and she was on the roadside gravel with Piero's hand at her elbow, and the other 2 vehicles pulling over ahead of them, and men spilling out into the dark with weapons up and searching. No contact. Just the highway and the dark and the distant lights of the city behind them. Dante stood on the gravel with his phone in his hand and the photograph still on the screen and looked at Elena across the roof of the vehicle they'd just evacuated. He heard everything, she said. Everything I told you in the car. He heard. Dante looked at the vehicle, then at his phone, then at her. And she watched the last version of the plan he'd been running dissolve completely. The timeline, the approach, the tactical advantage that 3 hours had seemed to offer. And she watched him stand in the dark on the shoulder of a highway with 14 men around him and no version of the next move that hadn't been contaminated. She watched him look at all of it, and she watched him make the face of a man who had arrived at the absolute bottom of what he'd built and found it insufficient, and she thought, now. Now is when it changes. Now is when whatever he does next either saves this or doesn't, and neither of us gets to know which until already in motion. She called Aldo's number. He picked up on the first ring. Who are they? She said. Plates traced to the Benedetti family out of Marseille. A pause. They're not on the original guest list. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. The Benedetti family. She'd seen the name once in Marco's files, not in the commission documents, in a separate folder she'd opened by accident and closed quickly, because at that point she hadn't yet understood what she was looking for. A side arrangement. A family that operated outside the commission structure and had reason to want the commission structure dismantled. They're not here for the gathering, she said. They're here to clean up after. Whatever happens inside that estate tonight, the Benedetti people are the ones who make sure none of it traces back to Vincent. She paused. They're the last layer, the one I didn't find in the files because it wasn't in Vincent's records. It was in Marco's. How many? She thought. The folder. 4 names, 4 vehicle manifests, each logged separately. 16, maybe 18. Aldo said something she didn't fully hear because she was already thinking past it. thinking about Dante inside the main house, with 11 men and Marco contained and a dead man protocol, somewhere in a system she hadn't mapped, and now 16 Benedetti soldiers coming through the north gate while the south approach was the only route out. "The tunnel," she said. "The cellar tunnel that comes out south of the cliff. Is it clear?" "Unknown. Get someone to the cellar entrance right now and get it clear. That's the exit." She heard her own voice doing the thing it did when she was running pure operational logic, stripped of everything else. The voice she'd developed in 2 years beside Dante and refined in 5 months surviving Marco. "And get that message to Dante, not by radio, person to person, right now." She ended the call. She looked at Favre in the dark of the vehicle. Favre looked back at her with the calm of someone who had long since made peace with the kind of situations her work put her in. "The tunnel exits 40 meters south of the cliff edge," Elena said. "If they come out that way, they need a vehicle on the coastal road below the estate." She looked at Piero. "That's us." Piero was already starting the engine. She put her hand on her stomach and felt the movement that had been her constant companion for months, steady, insistent, entirely indifferent to the arithmetic of the night. And she thought, hold on, just a little longer. The vehicle came out of the service road and onto the highway heading south, running dark, no lights, moving toward a coastal estate where Dante Moretti was standing over Marco Salvatore with a dead man protocol still armed somewhere in the dark and 16 Benedetti soldiers coming through the front gate, and the only exit was a tunnel she'd memorized from the inside, and the only person who knew exactly where it came out was sitting in the back seat, counting her daughter's movements against her palm and driving toward the thing she'd spent 8 months trying to get far enough away from to survive. She was driving toward it anyway, because the math, for once, was simple. There was no version of safe that didn't go through the next hour, and the next hour needed everything she had left. The tunnel smelled like salt water and old stone and the specific cold of spaces that never saw light. Dante went through it last. Not protocol. Nothing about the last 4 hours had been protocol. But because the tunnel was 40 meters of limestone passage wide enough for one person moving carefully, and the men ahead of him needed to move fast, and the man behind him was Greco, who would cover the cellar entrance until the last possible moment and then cover it some more. Marco was between them, wrists bound with zip ties from Aldo's kit, moving without resistance, which was the behavior of a man who had correctly assessed his remaining options and found them limited to cooperation. The dead man protocol location had taken 6 minutes to extract. Not through anything Dante was proud of, through the specific arithmetic of a man watching his last leverage evaporate in real time as the sound of Benedetti vehicles on the north approach got louder and the interior of his estate filled with people who were better at this than his remaining security. Marco had given up the location the way people gave up things they'd believed were permanent. Suddenly, completely. With the particular deflation of someone who had organized their entire position around a single load-bearing wall and was watching it go. A server. Off-site. The access credentials and the disarm sequence were in Marco's phone, which Aldo had in his jacket pocket. That was the deal. That was what cooperation looked like at 0340 in a coastal estate with 16 Benedetti soldiers coming through the front gate. Dante moved through the tunnel with one hand on the stone wall and thought about Vincent. Vincent was not in this building. Vincent had never intended to be in this building for this part. He was the architect, not the instrument. He would be somewhere clean, somewhere with a verifiable alibi, somewhere he could receive the news of what had happened at Villa Serrano and express the appropriate shock while the dead man protocol sat disarmed and the Benedetti family handled the residue and the commission gathering became a historical footnote rather than a massacre. That was the plan. The plan required Dante to be dead. Dante was not dead. He emerged from the tunnel onto the coastal hillside 40 meters south of the cliff edge into cold air that tasted like October in deep water. And the first thing he saw was headlights below. One vehicle, on the coastal road, positioned exactly where the tunnel exit met the hillside path. No running lights, just headlights, on low, aimed at the path so people coming down it could see where to put their feet. He stood at the tunnel exit and looked at those headlights and felt something move through him that he couldn't have named cleanly. Relief was part of it, but relief was too simple for what it was sitting inside of. His men came down the path in pairs. Marco between Aldo and a man named Testa, who had been doing this work since before Marco's current operation existed. Greco last, backward, watching the tunnel entrance with his weapon up until the hillside gradient made the angle impossible, and then turning and moving fast. Dante went down to the vehicle. The rear door opened before he reached it. Elena got out. She stood on the coastal road gravel with the cold wind off the water, moving her hair and her face in the low headlight wash, doing the specific thing it did when she was running a rapid assessment. Eyes moving from him to the men coming down the path to Marco, to the bandaged arm to his face, and back to his face. "You're bleeding through the bandage," she said. "I know. How many did you lose?" "None." Something shifted in her face. "Benedetti. Still on the north side. They'll find an empty estate and a security team that can't tell them much." He looked at her standing on the gravel in the dark. "You positioned the vehicle." "Piero drove. I navigated." She paused. "I knew where the tunnel came out." "I know you did." They looked at each other on the coastal road with the water somewhere below them in the dark, and 11 men moving around them with the efficient purposefulness of people who had work left to do, and Marco Salvatore standing 20 feet away in zip ties, watching this exchange with the expression of a man cataloging information he no longer had any use for. Favre appeared at Elena's shoulder. "She needs to sit down," she said to Dante, with the tone of someone stating a medical fact and expecting it to be treated as one. "I'm fine," Elena said. "You've been fine for 4 hours," Favre said. "The baby has been fine. I would like both of you to continue being fine, which requires sitting down." Elena sat down, not gracefully. She lowered herself onto the running board of the vehicle, with one hand on the doorframe and the other on her stomach and the ankle extending carefully in front of her, and she did it without comment or performance, which told Dante more about how tired she was than anything she would have said. He crouched in front of her, at her level, not above. She looked at him. "The protocol," he said. "The credentials are in Marco's phone. I need 30 minutes with a clean connection to access the server and run the disarm sequence." He paused. "After that, Vincent has no leverage. And then I find Vincent." She held his eyes. "You know where he is." "I have a good idea." "You've had a good idea about Vincent for 22 years, she said. "Most of those ideas were wrong." He absorbed that. It landed the way true things landed. Not painfully exactly, but with weight. "Yes," he said. She looked at the water she couldn't see, at the dark where the water was. "He'll run when the Benedetti team reports back. He'll know the estate is empty and Marco is contained and the protocol is the only card left." She paused. "He'll try to arm it remotely. Trigger it before you can disarm it. Which is why I need the 30 minutes. You don't have 30 minutes. Elena. He'll know within 20 that something went wrong tonight. His timeline collapses the moment the Benedetti team makes contact and gets nothing." She looked back at him. "You have 15 minutes, maybe less." Dante looked at Aldo. Aldo already had Marco's phone out. "The server credentials," Dante said to Marco. Marco looked at him from 20 feet away with his hands bound and the coastal wind moving his jacket and the expression of a man doing one final calculation. "The arrangement we discussed," he said. "My cooperation for—" "You're alive," Dante said. "That's the arrangement." A pause. "The username is m-salvatore-primary. The password is in the notes application under the contact name Esposito." He paused. "The disarm sequence is a 16-digit code. It's not written anywhere. I have it memorized." "Then you're going to tell it to Aldo right now," Dante said. "And Aldo is going to verify it works. And if it doesn't work, you and I are going to have a much shorter remaining conversation." Marco told Aldo the code. Aldo moved to the front of the vehicle and got in, and the next 14 minutes were the specific quality of silence that came from everyone present. Understanding that a number was counting down and the outcome depended on whether a 16-digit sequence entered into a server access panel was the right sequence or a delay tactic. Elena sat on the running board, and Favre sat beside her, and Dante stood near the vehicle's front and watched Aldo's face through the windshield without being able to read it, because Aldo's face was not the kind that gave things away while a task was in progress. At 14 minutes and 20 seconds, Aldo looked up. He nodded once. The dead man protocol was disarmed. 7 years of Moretti financial records, sitting in an off-site server in Liechtenstein, were now accessible only by credentials that Aldo had just changed to a sequence that Marco Salvatore would never know. Dante exhaled. One breath, controlled. The specific exhale of a man releasing something he'd been holding at operational distance for the last hour because holding it was the only way to keep moving. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call and spoke for 90 seconds in a voice too low for anyone else on the road to hear, and when he ended it, he looked at Greco and said, "Vincent is at the Moretti family's secondary property on the lake. He's been there since he left the airfield. He thinks it's clean." He paused. "It's not clean anymore." Greco moved. 3 men with him, 1 vehicle. What happened at the lake property in the hour that followed was not something Dante described to Elena and not something she asked him to describe. She understood the shape of it, the shape of what it meant when Dante Moretti said a location was no longer clean and sent Greco. And she sat on the coastal road running board with Favre's hand on her wrist and thought about Vincent Caruso sitting in a lake property that he believed was his sanctuary, holding a phone that was about to stop being useful. And she found that she had no feeling about it that she could cleanly identify as one thing. She thought about Pinto's son, 8 months old. She found that feeling was somewhat simpler. At 0500, as the sky above the water began to suggest rather than commit to light, Dante's phone rang. He listened for 40 seconds. He said 2 words, "Understood," and "yes," and ended the call. He came back to where she was sitting, still on the running board because Favre had stopped suggesting and started requiring, and he stood in front of her in the early gray light with his jacket blood-stained on the left side and his face carrying everything the night had cost it. And he said, "It's done." She looked at him. "Vincent," he said. She nodded. She looked at the water, which was becoming visible now in the pre-dawn, dark gray and very still, the October sea in the hour before the world decided to start again. She thought about 22 years. She thought about the weight of that, what it meant to build something over 22 years and have the foundation turn out to be a man who'd been measuring you for demolition the entire time. "Are you all right?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. No. She appreciated the honesty of it more than she could say, so she didn't say it. She looked at the water. "The commission families," she said. "They'll need to be notified. The gathering location, the conspiracy, they need to know what was planned and why it's not happening." "I know." "That's a conversation you have in person, not through intermediaries." "I know, Elena." "And the Varelli situation. I'll speak to Enzo directly, today." He paused. "Camilla deserves better than what happened tonight. She'll get an honest explanation and a clean exit, and whatever political accommodation makes the Varelli family whole." He paused again. "She didn't know." "I didn't think she did." "She's 26 years old, and she flew across the ocean to marry a man she'd met twice because her father told her it was the right move for the family." He said it without inflection, but she heard what was underneath it, something that had been sitting with him since the tarmac, since the moment he'd walked away from the woman he was supposed to greet and crossed a terminal building instead. She deserved better than being a piece in someone else's architecture. Elena looked at him. "So did I," she said, quietly. Not an accusation, just the fact of it, placed between them in the gray morning light. "Yes," he said, "you did." They sat with that. The sky continued its slow commitment to becoming light. Around them, the men who remained were doing the work of aftermath. Vehicles repositioned, communications managed, the long, quiet process of making a night like this one become something that had happened and was now being handled rather than something that was still happening. Marco was in the rear vehicle with Testa. The coastal road was empty in both directions. The estate above them on the cliff was dark. Favre broke the silence by standing and saying, in the tone of someone who had been patient long enough, "Hospital, now, not a discussion." Elena looked at Dante. "She's right," he said. "I know she's right." She put her hand on the door frame and began the process of getting up, which took longer than it should have and required more effort than she wanted it to in front of people. But Favre steadied her right arm, and she didn't refuse the steadying because she was past the point where pride was a resource she could afford to spend on things that didn't matter. Dante put his hand under her left arm. She let him. She was standing, the ankle held. She looked at the water one more time, full gray now, the horizon a slightly lighter shade than the sky. And she thought about the fact that 12 hours ago she had been moving through an international terminal trying to disappear, carrying everything she owned in a messenger bag and a waterproof folder. And the baby, always the baby, the presence that had kept her calculating when calculation was the last thing she had. She thought about what it had cost to walk out of Marco's estate with those documents. The 3 months of watching and memorizing and performing the compliance that kept her alive long enough to build something useful from the inside. The 5 months before that, after Dante had removed her from his organization, of trying to find footing in a world where every door had been quietly closed by a man who'd been managing her removal before she'd even left. She thought about the letter. Vincent's handwriting on the page, the date, the price. She thought about Dante reading it at the table with the document spread between them, and the 2-tap alignment he'd failed to do, and the specific thing that had moved through his face when he'd hit the date. She had not forgiven him. She was not in a place where forgiveness was a thing she had available in the quantity required for what had happened. But she was standing on a coastal road in the gray early morning with his hand under her arm, and she was alive, and the baby was alive, and the man who had engineered both their fates for the worse was no longer in a position to do so, and she was trying to locate what she felt about all of that, and finding that it didn't reduce to a single feeling. It was several things at once, the way real things usually were. In the vehicle on the way to the hospital, Favre in front with the driver, and Piero following in the second vehicle, Elena sat behind the passenger seat, and Dante sat beside her, and neither of them spoke for the first 20 minutes. The road came up from the coast and joined a larger road, and the sky got lighter by degrees, and the first signs of a city, infrastructure, a gas station, a truck headed somewhere early, began to appear. "The agreement," Elena said. "What you agreed to in the suite." He looked at her. "She's mine," Elena said. "That was the term." It was. "I need to know if that holds. After everything, the evidence, the protocol, the Benedetti situation, I need to know the agreement isn't something you made under operational pressure and revise when the pressure's off." He was quiet for a moment. She watched his face and found that she was still able to read it at the level below expression, still able to see the thing underneath the thing. And what she saw underneath this particular silence was not a man constructing a convenient answer. It was a man sitting with something that cost him something. "She's yours," he said. "That doesn't change. I need more than that." "What do you need?" "I need—" She stopped. She looked at the road ahead, at the city assembling itself in the early light. "I need to know what you want. Not what the agreement is. What you actually want." She looked at him. "Because I spent 2 years working beside you, and I thought I knew the answer to that, and then I found out the answer was a line item in a negotiation I didn't know was happening. So I'm asking directly. What do you want?" He looked at her. In the gray morning light in the back of a moving vehicle, with everything the night had done to both their faces, he looked at her the way he had looked at her downstairs in the corridor. Not the operational look, not the calculating look, the one with less structure to it. "I want to be in her life," he said. "I want to be in your life, if you'll let me build toward that over time. I'm not asking for anything tonight. I'm not asking for anything this month." He paused. "I'm telling you what I want so you have accurate information. What you do with it is yours." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 2 years," she said. "I know. It should have been the operating mode the whole time." "Yes," he said, "it should have." She looked back at the road. She put her hand on her stomach and felt the movement that answered her, steady, present, entirely hers. "The name," she said. "I've been thinking about her name." He waited. "Sophia," she said. "I want to call her Sophia." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Sophia, is that— do you have an objection?" "No," he said. "Sophia is—" He stopped, started again. "My mother's name was Sophia." She hadn't known that. In 2 years, she hadn't known that, which said something about what 2 years of working beside someone actually looked like when neither of you was paying attention to the right things. She sat with the coincidence of it, if it was coincidence, and decided it didn't require immediate analysis. Some things could just be what they were. The hospital appeared on the left side of the road. A private facility, not the kind with waiting rooms and intake forms and people asking questions that required particular answers. The kind that existed in every major city for people who moved through the world the way Dante Moretti moved through it. The kind that asked nothing and provided everything and understood that the nature of the emergency was not always the kind that got filed in a report. The vehicle stopped. Dante got out and came around and opened her door, and she got out with his hand available but not insistent, and she stood in the hospital drive in the early morning light, with the city waking up around them, and she thought, this is the other side. Not the good side necessarily. Not the version where everything was resolved and the cost had been reasonable and the future was a clean surface. The other side was just the place you reached when the thing you'd been surviving was over, and the surviving had changed you in ways you wouldn't fully understand for a long time. And the person standing beside you had also changed, and neither of you was the version that had existed before the damage. That was what the other side was. Not resolution, just the place where you could finally stop moving long enough to assess what was left. Favre was already at the entrance. She looked at Elena with the eyes of a woman who had seen this specific kind of person in this specific kind of aftermath before and knew that the next thing they needed was not medicine. Then she looked at them both and nodded once, the nod of a woman who had formed an opinion and was choosing not to share it, and went inside. Dante stood beside Elena in the drive. "The families," she said, "the commission. When you talk to them about Vincent, about the conspiracy, they're going to ask about me." "Yes." "What will you tell them?" He looked at the hospital entrance, at the automatic doors, at the gray morning sky above the building where the light was doing what light did in October. Not warm, not promising anything, just present. "The truth," he said, "that the person who found the conspiracy and documented it and carried it out of a hostile operation at personal cost was a woman named Elena Romano, and that she's the reason there was a commission gathering to protect instead of a massacre to explain." She looked at him. "They'll want to meet you," he said. "Eventually, when you're ready, on your terms." "My terms," she said. "Your terms," he said. "Always." She looked at the automatic doors, at the light inside the lobby, which was warm in the way hospital lobbies were warm, functional warmth, the warmth of a place designed to receive people at the worst points of their lives and make the temperature comfortable while everything else was not. She thought about the suite upstairs at the airfield and the documents on the table, and the moment she'd laid the first wire transfer record down and watched Dante look at it and begin to understand the shape of what he'd built and who had been inside it. She thought about the 8 months, all of what they'd cost. She thought about Sophia, who had no idea about any of it and was present anyway, constant and insistent, and already the most stubborn fact of Elena's life. "I'm not starting over," she said. "I want that understood. Whatever comes next, it's not a reset. Everything that happened is part of the account." "I know," Dante said. "I'm not going to make it easy. I'm not asking you to. And I'm going to be in the position of someone who doesn't trust you," she said, "for a long time. Maybe a very long time. That's not a negotiating position. That's just where I am." "Understood," he said. "And you'll have to build it," she said. "Not buy it, not arrange it, not manage the conditions around it until it looks like trust. Actually build it, which is slower and costs more and has no guaranteed outcome." "I know what it costs," he said. She looked at him, at the face that had aged in a night in ways she recognized because her own had done the same, at the arm with the blood-stained bandage that he hadn't complained about once in 4 hours, at the eyes that had learned, somewhere in the span of this specific terrible night, to look at her without the layer of operational distance that had always been there before. She didn't forgive him. She wasn't going to pretend the word applied yet. But she looked at him in the early morning outside a hospital in a city that was just starting to wake up, and she said, "Come inside." He came inside. The automatic doors closed behind them. The city continued doing what cities did, indifferent, perpetual, entirely unaware that somewhere in the night just ending, An empire had nearly collapsed, and a conspiracy had been dismantled, and a woman had carried a bag of evidence through an international terminal on an injured ankle, and changed the outcome of something very large through the specific force of having paid close attention when no one was watching her. The lobby was warm. Favre was at the desk. Elena walked toward her, and Dante walked beside her, and neither of them reached for the other's hand. But the distance between them was the distance of people who had made a decision to be in the same direction and were beginning, carefully, imperfectly, and without guarantees to move that way. Sophia moved. Elena felt it. That familiar, insistent presence, the kick that said, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." And she put her hand against her side and slowed for half a step and breathed. Then she kept walking. Outside, the October light was doing what it always did, arriving without asking, falling on everything equally, making no distinction between what deserved it and what didn't. It fell on the hospital drive and the empty vehicle in the city beyond it, and the coastal road 2 hours south where the sea was gray and moving and had already forgotten everything that had happened in the dark above it. The night was over. What came after it was not a story with clean edges. It was the harder thing. The daily work of two people trying to build something real from the materials of what they'd survived, in the knowledge that survival wasn't the same as deserving it, and that the things you broke didn't unbreak themselves just because you'd finally stopped breaking them. It was slower than any plan Dante Moretti had ever made. It was the only one that mattered.